Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Welcome to this In Conversation session. Before we start, this session is being recorded. I have to remind you of that. I'm Ruth Dundas, Professor of Social Epidemiology at the University of Glasgow. I've got a couple of UKPRP hats. I'm PI of the Maternal and Child Health Network, and I'm also co-PI with Niamh Fitzgerald of the Community of Practice. So, welcome. I'd just like to say that I've had a great day so far, and so hopefully this is going to be a good end to the day. So this session is going to be a sort of guided conversation and discussion with the directors of the UKPRP funded consortia. So what we're planning to do is, I suppose, exploit one of the key features of the UKPRP, and that's the sort of collective knowledge and expertise that is funded across a range of topics, a range of determinants, a range of exposures, a range of outcomes. And we're going to tap into that knowledge and expertise with a conversation and a discussion with the directors of the consortia. So I'll briefly introduce them, and further details about them are available in the conference handbook, and you can always Google them if you want more details as well. So we've got, oh, you're all sitting in an order that I wasn't expecting, but okay, we have on the far side, we have we have Jean Fader from Vision. Then we have Ruth Hunter from GroundsWell, and then we have Tim Hobbs from Kailo, we have Linda Bauld from Spectrum, we have Petra Meier from SIPHER, and we have John Wright from ActEarly.
It's like a James Bond villain, isn't it? Everybody's name.
It is like a James Bond villain, and then I come in with Matchnet, which sounds like a dating agency. So I've got some questions to start off, to start the conversation, and each question is going to be initially answered by two of the directors, and then we'll kind of like widen out the discussion to the directors to let them comment on what they've heard. And really what I'm hoping for is a stimulating, interesting and inspiring hour to take us through to the drinks reception. So that's my challenge to the six of you. So the first question is to Ruth Hunter and Petra Meier. And this is really thinking about the UKPRP. That was set up to kind of like drive innovation, to deliver sort of large-scale solutions and cost-effective solutions that will improve health and the prevention of NCDs. So coming to you first, Ruth. What innovation has GroundsWell found useful, and would you use it again?
Thanks, Ruth. And it's interesting that people will need a drink after this hour. So GroundsWell is very much about urban green and blue spaces, and really a focus on systems transformations for NCD prevention and reducing inequalities. And I think there's probably three things that I think UKPRP funding has really helped us with. One is around innovation in systems methods. So we've been doing some work with the team, particularly in Queen's and also in Cranfield, around developing capacity and building capacity in different systems methods, and also around developing new models, particularly hybrid models where we're bringing together. Usually we see these types of methods and tools used in isolation, so causal loop diagrams, agent-based models, soft systems models, and what we're trying to do is develop that a bit more and see where we can integrate these different models and develop these hybrid models. So that will be one element, and what we term kind of developing systems practitioners, so people who really have these skills to deliver on kind of complexity science systems thinking. Another one is around community empowerment and co-production. And work that Ruth Jepson's very much taken a lead on. One around, a lot of this work's around working with marginalised groups, so people who are homeless, refugees, people with disabilities, And I think what UKPRP funding and having 5 years to do has allowed us to really build relationships with lots of organisations and with communities themselves. This type of work really does take time. And I think the other thing that we found really useful in GroundsWell is the introduction of kind of principles and practices on team science. So we have a co-leadership model in terms of 3 directors, but we also have that co-leadership model in terms of our different work packages as well. And that's been really helpful, very purposely bringing different disciplines and different backgrounds together to really, I suppose, progress in that kind of interdisciplinary research area.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. And Petra, what about SIPHER and its innovations?
So, I mean, unsurprisingly, I was going to say similar things, so it's a bit unfortunate to be the second one and say, well, you know, the focus on systems has been quite different. You know, for someone who's come from the alcohol field and drugs and so on, where it's very much on lifestyles and potentially industry, but then sort of moving to a space like inclusive economies. You know, what do we even mean by this? You know, for the first year, we were talking to our policy partners, what is it that you're actually trying to achieve here? And even trying to define, you know, are we talking about green growth? Are we talking about any growth? Is it post-growth? Is it, you know, what do you mean by inclusion? Is it spatial? Is it a particular population group? Has been, or so they say, really, really useful. Is you know, going for a very large, ambitious and quite nebulous policy aim has been painful at times, and we've had various discussions with our SAB whether we're ever going to produce anything sensible. But it's been hugely useful for policy partners and us to reflect on how can we help them define what they're trying to achieve. How can we then get some baseline understanding of where the problems are, where they need to target their investments, their intentions, and so on. And now getting to a stage where we can actually run policies through models and, you know, having versatile models that can answer many different kinds of questions, especially in the area of income and mental health, and, you know, whether that is mortgages or cost of living crisis or fuel allowances, or whether that is a change to the universal credit system. So taking the time to build the infrastructures that is multi-purpose rather than focused on a particular policy question where you then, you know, have one particular thing that you can answer and then you throw it away, has been massively valuable. And I think in future grants, that's what I would want us to be able to do, and for there to be the patience to allow these developments to happen, because they will. I mean, I think most of us are now at a stage where they can show real impact and real things that they can do that we weren't able to. Obviously, multidisciplinarity is hugely important, you know, so if we've got the systems engineers who conceptualize everything as a problem to be solved and, you know, work backwards, everybody else works forwards, or the qualitative researchers who say, well, what do you even mean by system science? The bringing together in SIPHER, that's been really important for me, of the soft systems aspects and the hard systems modeling, and how you need the soft systems in order to be able to interpret your quantitative models, and vice versa. You know, have the quantitative models to probe some of the qualitative understandings, and that's been a really rich interplay between completely different thought traditions. And, you know, even when they talk about systems, they mean different things. So that's been hugely exciting for us, and something I would definitely want to continue.
Okay, thanks. I can see some sort of nodding comments. John, I'll come to you and see reflection.
I think at the core, when it came out, was about interdisciplinary research. And I think that was quite one of the concerns about prevention research, is the lack of capacity for that wider than health sector involvement. And that was a big change for us in ActEarly. It was getting people from built environment, transport, housing, into the health research and prevention research agenda. And one of the lessons for us was how they didn't know how to apply for MRC or NIHR funding, and they said, no, they never fund us. You know, this is not stuff that we do. So that journey over the last few years to give people confidence and bring people in from other disciplines to focus on health and prevention, I think has been quite groundbreaking.
Okay, good.
I could echo that. It's the interdisciplinarity that I think is kind of a unique feature here. We've had problems, though, around language, so we're working on glossaries, because one of the factors of interdisciplinarity is that we may be using the same terms, but actually they mean different things. So even though it's been a great benefit, it's also been a challenge in building up a way of having a, if not a common language, translations across the languages.
That's actually a really interesting point. I was at a symposium, I think it was, in the last session, and it was being run by Trude, and I should just say Trude is one of the other consortia, but unfortunately Matt Hickman couldn't be with us today, but that, and Trude were echoing that same thing of, like, they spent a lot of time trying to work out that common language. They started with glossaries, weren't sure whether that was the right way to go, but it was a bit of helpfulness. So I think it's nice that you're finding the same kind of things, and I think that's good that we can sort of share that today. I'm going to come on to my next question, which is coming to you, Jean. So one of the principles was, I suppose, it was the interdisciplinarity and the transdisciplinarity, but it also was about learning about the upstream determinants and that sort of like wider prevention strategies. So I suppose thinking about that kind of like wider determinants and prevention, do we know what the optimal balance is about where we should be investing? Investing could be money, policies, time, in the kind of like multiple determinants of health that will improve health and narrow inequalities.
So even just looking at it through the lens of violence prevention, I would say no. But I thought it was an interesting and tricky question, which the day-to-day has helped me think about more, because it seems to me that idea of optimal balance, it's not a scientific question. It's actually a policy question that needs to be informed by good evidence and debate. And it became clear today with some of the amazing presentations that it's a different kind of activity than some of our maybe more core research activity within the consortia. Now, within Vision, we've found a way, I'm not saying through great foresight necessarily, but we've realized that, for instance, getting stakeholders, policymakers together with us around discussing what theories of change might look like about the upstream determinants and the downstream factors, we actually have already started that discussion about optimization. Do I think one day we're going to have this wonderful complex model which, well, where we plug in maybe a SIPHER idea that, we plug in all the factors and we come up with an optimum solution? Well, obviously not. It's going to be more complex than that. But it is a sort of, I think all the consortia have something really to contribute to that conversation, which also needs to have the lived experience voice in it. And sometimes there are going to be real contradictions between what our lived experience groups want, what our stakeholders want, and what the academics are coming up with in terms of evidence. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to come to John, see if he's got any reflections or anything on that.
Oh, great.
Great, John's got the answer. We can all go home.
The idea of silver bullets here isn't going to happen. So our reflection in ActEarly. ActEarly, it was a city collaboratory approach to reducing inequalities when we wrote the bid. And it was built on a cohort that we run in Bradford called Born in Bradford. And some of the lessons over the last 15 years for that cohort, as you will all know, is how health inequalities are starting the day that we are born. And we've measured that, whether it's in biomarkers from insulin or adiponectin or lifestyle factors like diet or physical activity. And you can see these marked divergences by ethnicity, by socioeconomic position. And it's starting very young. So we called our project ActEarly, clues in the name, bit of Ron Seal. Let's start acting early, and I think that's one of the messages from me, is that we need to do that. Unfortunately, the counter-terrorism police decided to call their very different prevention program ActEarly, and so we had to do some remarkable shifting to try and drop the ActEarly bit of it. But the other component of it, so focusing on early life, childhood, first 1,000 days, actually the whole of childhood, adolescence is our big focus now, I think is really key, and we don't do that because there's not many problems. Mental health is a big issue in young people today, and so we're starting to look at it, but that's where it's all starting. In the hospital I work, we're building bigger diabetes units and bigger cardiology units. When we can show from the data in Bauld and Bradford that this is starting like in the first few days of birth. So we've got to try and think about, it's the tyranny of the urgent over the important, and we've got to get back into the important. The other component of this is the systems bit, and how when we look at the data from our cohort, everything is clustered. So, the children growing up, the poor quality housing, streets with speeding cars and air pollution and lack of green space and poor quality schools and crime and lack of jobs. These are all clustering factors. And so when we try and think of silver bullets, it's never going to work. So our approach is to try and look at how we could do that in 3 areas, really. Healthy places, looking at neighborhoods, healthy schools, looking at schools being really important, and healthy livelihoods. And I think the areas that we've made changes on, Kirsten and Rosie, are places in particular, and schools. I think the gap between health and education and schools is really noticeable, actually, and I think that's something that we should be focusing more on. And the livelihood stuff is stuff we struggled with because it's more macroeconomic, and that fundamentally is about progressive taxation and what we do as a country. Our European neighbours have 40% tax rates. We have closer to 30% in the UK, and there's something about how we are, what we do as a progressive nation, and what we want to do that. So yes, general election. And
I'm just going to come to Linda. Did you have? Yeah, I'll come to Linda and then Tim.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. I mean, the overwhelming evidence, as you've said, is that early intervention and the wider determinants are the major drivers of health and life chances. But for decision makers, it's a very different picture. And everybody in the room knows that. The politicians that I work with in my government role, that some of you will as well, they're faced with a deficit they have to solve in the next few months. They're faced with people, clamoring if you try to close a hospital or change a service structure, the streets are not clean, etc. So their motivations are very different. And I think it is the role of academics, researchers and analysts to present the evidence against that, and why prevention is absolutely the main focus. And sometimes the work that you in the room here today do now won't actually make a difference for many, many years in the future. So it's about generating the evidence so that when the evidence can be used, we can make a difference. I mean, the best thing we could do would be to restructure society and to change, as you say, our fiscal frameworks and that kind of thing. But we as researchers can't do that. But I think if we keep making the case, because it's there, it's stark, it's very obvious, that's the best contribution we can make. And I think these consortia are contributing to that.
Okay, thank you. I'll come to Tim and then back to you, Petra.
Yes, to build on some of the points. I think one thing that's really kind of critical is, we've got a really good understanding around the kind of social determinants of health. I mean, the research, the bodies of research are really clear and compelling. We don't need any kind of further research around what matters and what's important from a policy perspective or from a research perspective. One thing that we've tried to do in order to put some of that research and insight into practice is to really kind of ground and centre the work within the local communities in which we're working within. So within Kailo, our work is focused on improving young people's mental health and well-being. And our entry point has been very explicit and intentional about this being kind of youth-centred. So we spent the first 9 to 12 months just listening very closely and carefully to what young people and folks within the local communities in which we're working in, what mattered to them. And we're working in 2 very different contexts, one in Newham in East London, and one, so a very dense inner city kind of urban area, and another in rural northern Devon, a kind of, so 2 intentionally very, very different community contexts. We know that there's some cross-cutting social determinants around young people's mental health that are relevant across both of those, but actually some of the things that really drive and affect young people's mental health in those areas are very locally specific and contextualised, and those young people within those communities and the people that support, work, live around them could very compellingly articulate actually what matters and what's relevant there. So that's been our entry point, and we've surfaced and amalgamated that with systems mapping, integrating the research to like underpin and girder some of those insights. And then our trick has then been to connect that to the priorities of the hard-pressed policymakers in those local areas who, just as you said, Linda, are grappling with how do you deal with a chronically overstretched CAMS system, expensive out-of-care placements and so on. But we've been able to kind of bridge what matters locally to young people in communities, and through some of the kind of systems work and the research work, being able to demonstrate the links between these competing priorities. So for us, I think it's starting with communities and people, and using that as a bridge to the priorities of local and, over time, kind of national policymakers.
Okay, thanks. Petra.
I'd argue that we need loads more research on the social determinants of health. So this is where the panel debate starts, is because we don't know what the causal mechanisms are at all. We know that income generally, people with very low income tend to have worse health, and people with higher incomes tend to have better health. What lies in between those two things can be any number of causal pathways through nutrition, through housing, through various other things. I don't think we quite understand where to focus our attention, and quite often we see that you do an income intervention or you do an employment intervention, it doesn't work the way you think it would, and we have no idea why it doesn't. Maybe there was something a bit wrong with the implementation, but I think we have that sort of almost, I don't know, it's not a very humble stance to sort of say, oh, we know everything there is to know about it. I really don't think we understand the whole system of how the social determinants hang together and how they influence the things that matter. And I think a lot more of that mechanistic understanding, much as I hate the word, would be really useful in order to then have interventions that actually work. So this isn't where SIPHER is focused, but I think the more SIPHER has done, the less I sort of thought, actually, if you dig into the evidence that we thought we'd just build our models on, the evidence is actually really poor in many areas. And then I guess the other thing I wanted to mention is you can live with that multi-optimization sort of framework that people care about different things. Yeah, as long as you understand what the key things are that policymakers want to hear, that your communities care about, that your researchers care about, you can build that into your models in wise ways. In ways where we're creating a decision support tool which allows you to modify different things and give different values to different things. So you're not forced as a researcher to make any judgment calls on what the best policy is. What you say is, if you care about X and you don't want to affect whatever, you don't want to make inequalities worse, you want to improve your overall health, you also care about your economy, but you don't care as much about any number of other things, then here's a policy solution that might work. So you allow the decision maker to play around with the parameters that they find most important, and then choose wisely, and sort of taking the politics out. Well, you can't take the politics out of public health, and that will never work. But making your evidence and your tools versatile to different political streams, and make if I talk to a Tory minister, the evidence they'll be interested in will be different to if I talk to someone in Scotland. As long as my evidence speaks to the things that they're interested in, and can say something about, well, if with your particular mindset and the policies you're considering, you want to do something about public health, which also, gives you increased productivity or whatever other thing they care about, then here is something that you could try. And I think that's been a useful journey. We're nowhere near there, and it's ongoing process, but we're getting to a stage where we're starting to be able to do that, and I think that's a worthy avenue for further exploration.
Thank you. I think my minor reflections from what I've heard is that we have to take the politics out of public health, but I'm sure two of them were calling for revolutions, but anyway, that's beside the point. They weren't maybe calling for revolution, but I think they were. Anyway, I'll not put words in your mouth. So, thinking then about the future, I suppose, so what's the future for prevention research? And Tim, I'll come to you, and if you want to talk about I don't know, immediate challenges for prevention research?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question to end the day.
Sorry, we've got all evening.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I would be remiss speaking from the Kailo consortium without flagging what I think is an important priority for future prevention research is around children and young people, which I think is an often neglected area of prevention research. We tend to focus a lot on accumulations of health burdens over the life course. And in the way that kind of John was describing, we know there's such compelling evidence around the critical importance of circumstances in which you're born and your conditions growing up. And we know that mental health and well-being is a critical issue, and suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst young people within the UK. But I think this is, I talk about mental health because I think thinking ahead around the next 15, 20, 50 years or so, there are a number of quite significant and emerging threats, as it were, for society that I think prevention research needs to be really attuned to coming forwards. And many of these have been spoken about in some of the presentations today. We have climate threats. There will inevitably, we've probably heard a fair bit about the pandemic, and there will no doubt be future kind of pandemics. And we've got a rapidly changing technological and social environment that young people are going to be kind of growing up in. And I'm going to come back to this point around technology and emerging technology in a minute, because I think it's really quite fundamental. But all of this is going to be contributing to a huge degree of uncertainty amongst young people's futures, and in fact all of our futures. And that uncertainty has all sorts of knock-on effects: fear, lack of agency, control, which we know is related to mental health. So I think these issues around uncertainty, place in the world, are going to broaden our conceptualizations around health, and we need to think much more broadly. However, having just made a case for a particular issue, I think there's also a counter-argument about the future of prevention research really needing to move beyond quite specific, narrow issues. Because we can have a discussion about this, but there are a number of well-known cross-cutting social determinants around health. I agree, Petra, that the mechanisms, there's a lot more nuance we need to understand around how those mechanisms play out in relation to different outcome areas. But a lot of this kind of boils down to fundamental differences in inequality to access, resources, economic resources, social resources, environmental resources. So this inequalities is kind of fundamental. And I think there's a real danger within the both prevention research field and in the policy field that we split the vote, as it were. We argue for a focus on particular determinants or particular outcomes when actually there are a number of fundamental drivers that if we made a concerted effort to change and address, we could see fundamental outcomes and impacts across a wide range of health domains, very broadly defined. So I think there's an emphasis, I think, on needing to consolidate around a number of high leverage points, as it were, within the system. And finally, I'll just come back to this point around technology, because I think this is really important. Technology and harnessing AI for good, not for ill, I think is going to be a huge agenda for prevention research over the coming years. AI is going to revolutionise how we approach research, design, policy. It is already now, and over the next 5 to 20 years, it's going to be absolutely kind of huge how this is going to be affecting the way that we understand the world, how we collect data, whether that's through devices, financial transactions, smart cities. The way in which we gather data is going to radically change. The advances in how we synthesize and make sense of that data and make predictions from that data is going to be significantly enhanced through the use of these technologies. And we're already seeing some of the kind of scary applications of the generative aspects of AI and how we might be kind of responding, whether that's through large language models or other ways. So these are going to have really quite significant impacts, both upon how we undertake research and what we research and why. These immensely powerful capabilities will and already are being quite aggressively harnessed in a variety of different ways across industry. And that has huge scope to kind of widen inequalities that young people face. Going back to that point around access to resources, power, this technology is only going to accentuate and widen some of those things. So I think there's a real urgent need for the prevention research community to think around how we more effectively utilize and harness AI for good, not ill, and how we also think through both the ethics and the regulation of that technology in our prevention research.
Okay, thanks. And Linda, you've been waiting patiently, nodding along at some things, but others. So what do you think about, you can have immediate, I'll give you the long term, how about that?
So what is the future for prevention research? I think there's
long-term challenges as well, so the future, yeah.
Well, there's a narrow and a broad definition, and I think we all need to embrace the broad definition. So the narrow definition of prevention effectively is that you're trying to prevent some kind of specific negative future outcome that's quite maybe discipline or topic specific. The broader definition actually is really, I think, well encompassed by UKPRP and the original vision for the funding. And just hearing my colleagues speak here, you are researching multiple topics that are all relevant to health from an interdisciplinary perspective. So I think we're also always going to face a challenge in engaging with funders to make the case for this kind of quite fundamental preventative research, because the technology or the interventions that are technology specific or they're clinical that lend themselves to particular research designs are more contained in a way and a bit sexier. So if you look at the amount of research funding that is allocated to what could be described as prevention research, particularly in a narrow sense, it's actually still tiny from UKRI, from the medical charities, etc. And even though colleagues have made the case for years for it to be expanded, they keep banging up against the other needs that I talked about earlier in terms of treatment, support, etc. But fundamentally, as a society, we can't afford to continue doing what we're doing if we don't invest more in prevention and prevention research. Just to use where we are in Scotland as an example, we have a slightly shrinking population, we have an aging population, and we have a burden of disease that is predicted to expand by about 21% over the next 20 years. It's fundamentally unaffordable as a society. And many countries around the world are facing that. So unless we shift our model of investment towards more early intervention, other solutions, and in fact using technology, we're going to be in trouble. So I think funders get that, decision makers get that, but I think the research community has to come forward with the really exciting ideas to continue to make the case for it. And then the other thing I would say is that multi-funder initiatives are really key. Spectrum focuses on the commercial determinants of health, which is basically trying to identify how the activities of large companies and industries are directly harmful to health. It's very difficult to get that funded in projects. We probably wouldn't have been funded without UKPRP, certainly in the scale we have. And I'm sure some of the issues colleagues here are looking at. So I think if we can make the case for prevention research that cuts across councils and funders, and to do that as a research community, that's really exciting. And then the other thing, just to say in reflection to what you said, Tim, it is an intergenerational thing. Because if we just take climate change as an example, the exposures that our children and grandchildren are going to face are totally different from what I've experienced in my lifetime, even here in the UK. So we need to think ahead. And I think we have a real opportunity or a privilege as researchers, because we are often the last ones standing in the room. We come into a field, we invest in it, we progress the research, and we know about it and learn about it, and we're still talking about the same topic some years later. So I think we're actually the ones that can really drive the thinking and innovation in many ways. So I hope there are many more UKPRPs in the future, or things like them, that we grow the field and that we do that together.
Okay, thank you. Yep, John, come to you.
Yeah, just one other thing from a sort of research, because we are mostly researchers here, is the infrastructure to do prevention research, which I don't think we invest, unlike the sort of biomedical research with the Crick Institute or clinical trials units. In prevention research, we diffuse it. We try a sort of homeopathic prevention intervention in one place, and then we do another thing in one place, and we expect this sort of magical effect. So there's something about building place-based prevention research centres where we can study the systems approach to it. And I think key to that is strong community co-production and really good data linkage. And because prevention takes a long time and we don't have the patience for it, having that life course data collection so that we can look at long-term effects. So it may take a long time, but at least we can understand it. Looking at intermediate markers as well. So the sort of data, the co-production, and then looking at combined approaches to prevention across the system and seeing whether we can make a difference. The idea of complex systems is a tipping point, and I just noticed that Shell and BP, thinking of climate change, are sponsoring. Should we all just get out of this room just to? But the idea of a tipping point, just as in climate change, is a tipping point in prevention as well.
They're friends of the Royal Society. I don't know whether we are.
I don't know whether we should be sitting here anymore.
Ruth, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, UKPRP is largely about NCD prevention and reducing inequalities, and we know that climate change is going to exacerbate NCDs and widen inequalities. We just had a workshop there on climate change and health, and really where are we as a public health community in terms of that agenda. And we know, for example, those who live in our worst off areas are going to have increased risk of flooding, and they're going to get left behind even more so than we've seen in public health, particularly as at the moment we see a focus on technologically focused solutions to climate change, for example, around electric vehicles. So there's things happening, and I think and climate change is one of those. We talk about this triple planetary crisis, which is around changing climate, air pollution and biodiversity loss. In Northern Ireland, I think we're the 12th worst in the world for biodiversity. People think, oh, Northern Ireland is really green. It's not. So we have these different crises that are well, they're here, which are very much going to exacerbate NCDs and inequalities. And I think as a public health community, we need to kind of get on top of those.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Petra. You don't need the microphone. You have one.
It's getting late. One thing that sort of fits with the climate agenda, with the AI agenda and so on, is that we're very often backward looking. A lot of what we do is evaluating retrospective data, things that were collected a long time ago. We're not really good at, that sort of future casting, understanding what's coming towards us, how much of future health's already baked in by the things that have happened already that are in train where there's nothing we can do, but how much of what's coming is still modifiable, and where would we best put our efforts and our attention, and then what are future risks on our horizon. But if you look at, prevention spending is generally a small part of funded spending. If you look at future looking prevention spending, it's tiny, and it's really difficult to convince anybody that we've got methods that are good for this kind of thing. But I think there is a massive call to us to try and start to develop the methods that can do really good future modeling, which is something that, in other areas like climate change has been done for a long time, but I don't think we've particularly engaged with that or know quite where to start. But, if collectively we can come up with some really cool bids that are convincing, there's a lot of work to be done.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do now is, well, the panel have done really well at supporting and answering and commenting on other people's questions. I've enjoyed that. So they can continue to do this, but I would like to widen out the discussion if there's any comments, questions from the audience, and this is from this room, but also we've got some of our colleagues in the upper gallery. So I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions. If you put your hand up. I need to stand here at the microphone so that people in the upper gallery can hear. So that's why I'm not. Thank you. There's a question over there. Can you wait for the microphone, please? It is coming. It's just because so that the people in the upper gallery can hear your question. And I might not come to all of you to respond, but if you can indicate if you want to answer the question, that'd be great.
Thank you. And as John knows, I do actually have a very loud voice, so I bet they probably could have heard me in the upper gallery. So my question is about capacity building. Well, one of the things that I've noticed that it's very difficult to get transdisciplinary researchers that can bridge the divide between health and other disciplines, for example, the built environment. So can you comment on how your consortia have addressed that? And do you feel positive about the young talent that we have coming through, or do you think there's more that we should be doing?
Linda, yeah, that's a great start.
So after Petra said we are really good at looking back, I'm going to look back. But anyway. So this is sort of my third consortium on a similar topic, and I would say the capacity building Niamh sitting in front of you, she can comment because she's led a lot of this for Spectrum, is probably the thing that I'm most proud of, because I can see now colleagues who started out as PhD students 15 years ago in the first version of some parts of Spectrum, 18 years ago now actually. You know, some of them, well, at least one of them I know of is a professor, and others are senior academics. So we've really brought, I think, a cohort and some fantastic public health researchers. And quite often they came from different disciplines, or their original first degree was in something quite different, and then they moved into public health, because public health is so interdisciplinary. All the topics we've been talking about, transport, housing, climate, you know, nobody's mentioned here populations, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, but all of these things are actually have a public health element. So I think, although it's tricky to work across disciplines, you can do it. A couple of suggestions of things that we found really helpful are placements, and I think we need to put more of that into bids. Having a training budget, even if you can't fund PhDs, so that people can go and take courses, and you were talking about technology. I mean, we need to adjust to the times and really upskill people. So in my academic career, what I've seen actually is much more interdisciplinarity now than we ever had earlier on. But I'm kind of relentlessly optimistic about this, and I have a feeling there are going to be other panel members who might tell you that it actually hasn't worked so well.
I'll come to Tim.
I'm not disagreeing with that, and you've had the benefit of seeing this play through, and it's great to hear that, you know, that there are ways in which capacity really can be built within the prevention research community. My response to the question was thinking, I think we need to not only build capacity within the prevention research community and nurture talent, but if that's going to go anywhere into practice, I think we also need to build the capacity for people working in places, within public systems, within communities that we're working with, to integrate, both to integrate the technical skills and the research that sit and exist within the academic partnerships, but crucially, we have to build the capacity within the partnerships, the communities, the public systems we're working in, to both engage with and use that, but also to develop those skills too. A real fundamental challenge, I think, that you inevitably get through research funding grants is that, you know, the stipulations of the grants are that they're for research. We've had to work really, really hard to distribute and put some of our resources directly into local community partnerships. So I think a crucial way forwards to build capacity is to combine research funding alongside other sources of funding that can directly build capacity within local communities, you know, young researchers, professionals, practitioners working in those spaces, and put resources into the communities alongside the research capacity building as well, because I think that will give us a greater impact.
Thank you. Oh, Ruth, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're quite excited in GroundsWell by the early career researchers coming through. So we've managed to leverage, I think we're now in 13 PhD studentships, and they sit across public health and a whole range of other disciplines, from architecture, from political science, from molecular epidemiology, from urban planning, from anthropology. So I agree with Linda. In one, it's providing funding, and I think as well for our postdocs as well, it's providing a good length of a post to actually give them an opportunity to learn new skills, to develop papers and impact, etc. And that's again what 5 years of funding is really helpful in doing, is actually providing a solid foundation for early career researchers to go forward from.
Thank you. We've got another question.
Rachel Cooper. It's really wonderful to see this community grow and all the postdocs and all the interdisciplinarity. So do you think this community is now ready to go and work in other disciplines? So if there's a big EPSRC, engineering, healthy places or engineering for health, is the community ready? Have we got a whole group of people who would happily go out of this nice group here and work with others? Are we ready to do that?
Petra?
I think so. I mean, you know, after SIPHER, the next big grant I went for was a large NERC grant. I didn't even know what NERC stood for at the time, but, you know, that's the kind of thing. They needed someone who knows something about systems and health, and I thought, yeah, I can do that. And I mean, the people who work on SIPHER, they're all interdisciplinary natives. You know, nobody knows what anybody's first degree was or whether it was in any way relevant, I think. I mean, you know, people can correct me, but it's something that doesn't even come up. It's the kind of skills, the applications, whether people have worked with policy partners. You know, the co-production is really, really important in what we do, and that sort of mutual upskilling. So I don't think anybody would worry about going to EPSRC or ESRC, and in a way I hope that UKRI will all become one thing anyway and stop thinking about those silos, because you know, I don't think it's the researchers that can't transcend that. I think sometimes it's the funding structures. And sorry, MRC colleagues.
It's a good research question, though. You know, somebody should do a social network analysis on it and see how people have developed. So, you know, let's get some empirical data. Let's not just rely on our anecdotes.
Yep, got a question in.
Thank you. That was quite fascinating and insightful. My question is, do we also bringing more politics into our research? And when I say politics, I'm not talking about with small p, I'm talking about big P in terms of Labour Party, Conservatives, Green Party, and then try to understand what were the seeds of change or agents of change, drivers of change, and what sort of things that perhaps we should collect an evidence for to make those impactful, I don't know, like changes in those parties, because eventually I get the inkling that if we all go out and vote for more greener parties, then we'll actually achieve better prevention than, you know, all the other evidence we collect around built environment. But I might be wrong, so I just thought that, you know, what's your thoughts on that?
I'll come to Jean first and then you, Linda.
Treading carefully here. I think within Vision, there was a very early recognition that we needed to engage with civil servants, with departments of state, whether it's the Home Office, whether it's the Department of Health and Social Care. Now, those departments of state are obviously finally accountable to ministers. So some of the work we've been doing, whether I give it an uppercase or a lowercase p, I think I'm going to have to bracket that off, is trying to understand what the policy priorities are of those ministers as they trickle down or press down on the civil servants. And now that we're at a certain point in the election cycle, when we're looking to see what's going to be in the manifestos, we absolutely do, I think, have a responsibility for engaging with those politicians, perhaps the future government. But we've got to do it in a nuanced way, because, I mean, coming back to one of the responses here about what our role is as researchers, at the end of the day, we want to articulate where the evidence is, which might allow them to further the policies that perhaps a new government will want to put in place that the current government doesn't. That's quite different from saying, this is the policy that you guys should be delivering, even if in our heart of hearts, we think it is. So I'm sorry if that sounds like a slightly namby-pamby response, but I do think we have to tread carefully. But absolutely, you're right. If we don't do that, we're just ostriches, really. We have to look to where the power is going to lie.
Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, Jean makes a lot of sense. I agree with everything he said. I would say be very careful. So there's a group of the research community who genuinely believe that it's our role to do the research and not to be advocates. So that's quite a common view in academia. No offense, but clinical researchers might have that view, for example. And I think you can get yourself into a situation where, as a researcher, particularly if you're prominent, and you've been, for example, a party member of a party, you're not going to get the ear of the other parties if they know that in the same way. So there is a relationship thing here. And I think working with political scientists in particular can really help all of us from multiple disciplines understand that. But we do have to advocate, as Jean says, find out what the other parties' priorities are, feed evidence into manifestos and the kind of mechanisms that we can. And the best single way, in my experience, is to do that is through advocacy organizations. So partnerships with your small local charities. I'm sure you've got examples in your part of the world you were talking about, Tim. And then thinking about big charities, if we're working on health, the big medical charities, because they have policy and advocacy departments that actually people are employed full time to find out what the priorities of politicians are. And I think that's a great way for us to partner with others to make sure that our evidence is used, or at least it's listened to. Yeah.
Thank you. Did we have another question? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I might change the subject a little bit, but I heard quite a few times people talking in this panel and in other lectures as well about the importance of co-production. And I wondered about how has co-production interacted with the research world? So when we're talking about co-production, we are talking about strategies that wants to bring everyone's voices in a very, in the same way, like everybody's voices are strong in a space or in a room, for example. But when we talk about the research world, and particularly the worlds that we are in here, they are very hierarchical, and the voices that are heard are only particular voices within the hierarchy of even where we exist. And I wonder how that has been mapped in the work that you have been doing, and if you believe there's true co-production happening, and that, or where do we need to go in order to get there?
Okay.
Shahid, do you want to answer that? Put you on the step.
Yes.
Yeah.
But just, I know I have a really loud voice as well, but they can't hear us in the upper gallery. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, no, I was only joking. But yeah, so one of the first things that we started doing when I started working in ActEarly, along with Rosie McEachran, who's on my left, and a few others, is to try and unpick what we mean by co-production, because there are lots of terms bandied around. Involvement, engagement, community empowerment, and lots of others, participation as well. But co-production is very specifically about finding ways to energize communities and empower communities to work with us on an equal footing, to share power in a relationship where members of the public have agency and there's reciprocity. So we started out on our journey to try and understand what does all of that mean, but also how do we make it work for our communities. So we developed a strategy, a co-production strategy, using appreciative inquiry as a method to ask members of the public, what do they want? How do we make it work for them? And so our strategy has been implemented by our local authority, by the Family Hub services, by our NHS partnerships. And the feedback that we're getting from our communities is, thank you for doing this, because it means that we can actually get involved in a way which makes a difference. We have a voice, we have an influence, and we have some agency. So I could give a whole lecture on how co-production works, but I'll just save you that by just pointing you towards the strategy, which is available on ActEarly website. So yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And also the development of peer researchers, Shahid, maybe. Is it worth a mention of that?
Sorry, I missed.
The development of peer researchers in the community.
Oh yeah. So one of the points that we heard quite a lot about from our communities was, how do we change it from you coming to us with ideas and then taking information from us and then publishing it, towards us actually getting involved as partners in research, as peers. So we've taken a journey towards something called as COPPER, which is abbreviated to Centre for Co-Production and Peer Research. And it essentially means we're going to be working with 4 community organisations in 4 different parts of Bradford, with 4 different communities insofar as identity is concerned. So one of the communities is Eastern European Roma, one of the communities is White British, one of the communities is refugees and asylum seekers, and then the 4th one is Pakistanis and Kashmiris. And our purpose, our mission is to provide them with the toolkits and awareness about how research works, and even provide them with some resources to deliver that. But for them to work out, those communities to work out what it is about the built environment that they feel affects their health and well-being, and then for them to produce whatever it is that takes for them to present that information to their local authorities, to the local authority, to their councillors, to the ward officers, to the police, to the schools, etc., to say these are the things that we've done some research on, these are some of the findings that we've uncovered, and here is what we think might change things to improve things. The copper that's going to be the first of many projects. I mean, that's kind of like the pilot of it. And we hope that will give some confidence to our communities, so they feel like, okay, we can actually get involved as equal partners in this, and it makes a difference. So that's that stemmed from the co-production strategy that I've just suddenly been landed the microphone to speak about. But yeah, if you want to see more information about that, sort of look onto our ActEarly website in Bradford.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll come to you, Tim. Maybe 45 seconds, a minute.
Super brief. The question was from my very close colleague, Jenny, who's working with us on Kailo. But I think it highlights a fundamental tension, though, that we often face within prevention research, where different stakeholders in these multidisciplinary teams value different things, different sources of insight, different epistemological basis of knowledge and understanding, and we sometimes really hit up against quite fundamental tensions. We've hit up against that within our own consortium, we've hit up against that within our communities and in our different partnerships. So I think we just need to be very aware and live of those differing perspectives, but be explicit and intentional about those at the outset, and then work to try and figure out ways where different sources of knowledge and insight are valued and contribute to other forms of knowledge.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time. I'm standing between you and a glass of whatever you would like to drink. So I'm going to come along the panel and ask for 30 seconds to 45 seconds of just one reflection on any of the questions that we've discussed today, or anything you'd like to tell us about prevention research or your consortium and how it's going. So Jean, I'll start with you.
Okay, so despite the lumper approach to looking at factors that go across all preventable health problems, I just want to make a pitch for violence. Violence has sort of been on the outside looking in as a research area in relation to public health, and there's been this sort of siloing with criminology research and police research. Vision is actually trying to combine them together within complex systems. So whatever else is measured, whatever else we're trying to integrate, we're going to keep making the pitch that violence needs to be part of it, and we need to measure it well.
Yeah, I think for us again, we're just at the start of our third year, and the scientific advisory panel at the end of our first year kind of challenged us with the need to adapt to the cost of living crisis, and I think alongside that is also the need to adapt to the climate crisis. And if Sandro is right earlier, we're going to have another infectious disease to deal with in 2025. So I think it's that need to kind of constantly be flexible and to adapt to what's actually happening on the ground. And the strapline for GroundsWell is transforming our cities from the ground up. And we have a community steering group who sits alongside our other kind of oversight groups. And that kind of really does keep us grounded in terms of what's the real world issues that we need to be supporting local communities with.
Thank you. Tim.
What I found really inspiring over today and the programme is the bridging of prevention research applied in different contexts and practice. And I think there's been just many inspiring examples around how that's happening really well. If we as a prevention research community stick within our prevention research colleagues' discussions and rules, we're never going to have any impact whatsoever. Similarly, if we if communities are working without the input and the insight from prevention research, they're also not going to get very far either. So the thing that inspires me about this group is the ability to integrate and bridge prevention research with people working in practice in communities. And that's where I think an impact lies.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
So just for me, I was involved in the very early days when the initial ideas of UKPRP were being formed. So it's absolutely brilliant just to see the wealth of research that's been funded through this initiative. I think it's fantastic. Spectrum is just kind of winding down, still charging ahead, but we've only got 9 months to run, maybe with a no-cost extension. So we're really focusing on our pathways to impact. But the great news is we've secured further funding through 2 big other initiatives that different members of the team are leading. So we're really hoping that quite a lot of the work on the commercial determinants will continue, because it's a tough, long game for us. And just to thank everybody in the Spectrum team and the funders, because it's just been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Petra.
Yeah, we were thinking this is probably the last full-blown conference for SIPHER within its original funding period, although we're also hoping for a no-cost extension. But yeah, it feels very much like consolidating and then thinking about the next stages. So that's going to be really interesting. What of this can we take forward in a number of different ways? For me, one of the key conundrums is still, if prevention research works well, then you don't see it. Yeah. If we prevent something, it's really hard to say that it would have happened had you not done this intervention, had you not done that thing. So challenge still is, how do you convince someone that what you're doing is valuable, even though you can never quite demonstrate that it has been important.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, just echoing some of the optimism, actually. You know, we are here, a small but perfectly formed group. And the sort of days of single agents causing disease, like tobacco, you know, we have moved on to understanding that prevention is much more around complexity and about systems of where we live and how we interact. And that philosophical, conceptual approach is a big change in recent years. UKPRP has allowed us to build capacity, to bring interdisciplinarity to this really important area. And while it's, you know, ending, it'll form in other areas. So this has been a really important bridge. So we're seeing the HDRCs being rolled off around the country, UKRI prevention research, population research programs being funded. So all built on the seeds that have been sown from the work that's been done here. So great optimism. It'll go off in different directions, but it's really important that we continue it. And we are having an ActEarly conference in April next year in Bradford. So if you want to come and hear what the best UKPRP consortia come to Bradford.
It's all right. I won't let John have the last word, because obviously I have to say something. I'd just like to thank the panel. I did say at the start that I hope it was going to be stimulating, thought-provoking and inspiring, and I think for me you've lived up to that expectation, and I hope it has for everybody else. I think my take home is that we need to keep doing these collaborative, multidisciplinary, bringing in wider disciplines, contributions from many sectors. We need this multidisciplinary approach so that we can make the best improvements in health. And I think this isn't a very good strapline for a T-shirt yet, but I'll be working on it, that prevention research can support stopping making policy for a crisis, I think is what I heard somewhere in the middle of all of this. Policy keeps being made for a crisis. We're not looking ahead and making it when it's not. Anyway, so thank you very much. This brings us to the end of day one. Tomorrow, day two starts at, I have to tell you this, day starts from 8:30 with coffee, and the parallel session D will start promptly at 9:30. And now we've got the reception, an opportunity for you to meet old friends, make new connections, and it's been really nice to see so many people that I've seen in square boxes with legs. So thanks again to the panel, and thanks to everyone for the discussion session. Sorry, while you're packing up, it's okay. You can hear me over the noise. We've got the feedback form is on your QR code, and if you'd like to remember to fill that in. And Niamh challenged you earlier on to make sure you're paying attention in all the sessions, because we're going to have on the evaluation form there's a vote for the best presentation. Thank you.